Hi everybody. This video lesson is going along with the PowerPoint that is listed under the week 1 module tab for the writing process getting started. Hopefully you've already looked over that PowerPoint, and I just wanted to hit on a few of the highlights and make sure that we all were on the same page in terms of the writing process and especially that first step on how to get started. I think a lot of people have heard the term writing process. You may not necessarily think that you have a writing process. Maybe you think you do, and we'll see how many of those steps listed in the PowerPoint that you actually include in your own writing process, because you'll see that there are 6 of them. There's getting started, planning, drafting, revising, editing and proofreading, and submitting. I think a lot of people, when they receive an assignment, they will quickly come up with a topic and then they'll just start writing. Maybe they'll do a little bit of revision, although I'm not sure that the revision that we do is necessarily a full revision of our essays. And then, we'll turn it in. So you're lucky to have someone hit 2, maybe 3 of those 6 writing process steps. So I want to go through each of those real briefly so you understand what each step consists of and why each step is important along the way. So that first step is getting started. That's exactly what it sounds like. This is where you're going to make sure you understand the assignment you've been given. You're going to come up with your topic, and then you're going to collect any kind of information that you need. That information might be research. It might be going through your class notes and your textbook and coming up with your own ideas to include in the essay. It's during that time that you're going to use the pre-writing strategies that are discussed at the end of the PowerPoint. So we're going to come back to those a little later. But the next step of the writing process is the planning stage. So this is where you're going to take that topic that you came up with in the first step, in the information that you collected, and you're going to start forming a plan for the essay. So in this second step, we're still not actually drafting anything yet. You're just going to come up with a working thesis. We're going to talk a lot about thesis statements over the next couple of weeks, so you'll get to know those very well. You're going to choose your method of development. This could mean, is it an open-ended assignment? Do you get to choose? Are you going to do compare and contrast, cause and effect, analysis, evaluation, as well as how are you going to develop the ideas? Are you going to explain your main points in chronological order? Are you going to go from your weakest point to your strongest point, or vice versa? How are you going to lay out the information? And then you can develop a plan or an outline from that. We're going to talk about one type of outline when we go back to the pre-writing techniques. But this type of outline that we're talking about here in the planning stage is more of an outline for the whole essay. So not just an outline organizing your thoughts, but an outline that has your working thesis statement, that has your first topic sentence for your first main point. And then the sub points under that section would be the supporting evidence you're going to use for that main point, and so on and so forth. So if you complete that step, if you do step 2, you will have for yourself a skeleton of the essay you're going to write. So then when you move into the third step, which is where we actually start drafting, you're just kind of filling in the blanks in a way and adding the guts of the essay, if you will. Because that drafting stage is where you're going to come up with your introduction, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion. That's the draft. The fourth step, this is the revision step. But I think a lot of people, when you are told to revise, we just start looking for the spelling and grammar errors. And if you notice, that's actually the 5th step. That's editing and proofreading. So what is that 4th step all about? What is revision? Well, we are going to spend some time talking about that over the next few weeks as well. You'll get to know the revision process really well. But just so you know now, that step has to do with the bigger issues of your paper. So I always tell students, why would you worry about the small errors of grammar and spelling when you're not even sure that that section is going to stay in your essay? What if that section is so problematic that you have to completely rewrite it anyway? So don't worry about those small details until you are certain that the essay you have right now, the draft is solid, right? Then you go back and you look for those small errors, you correct them, and then you move on to the very last step, which is submitting. And that might seem like a silly thing to include as part of the process, but it is an important step because you want to make sure that you have read all the instructions carefully, that you know everything that you're supposed to submit with your assignment. Was it supposed to be in a specific format? Things like that. So those are the 6 steps of the writing process, and each one is important in its own way. Now, when you move on to the 4th slide, what you want to pay attention to here is the fact that, yes, it's a process, and you want to make sure that you consider all 6 of those steps, but it is still your process. And you have your own strengths and weaknesses, and your strengths might be someone else's weaknesses and vice versa. And your process might be different for every assignment you do. You might spend a lot of time in that planning phase and not have to spend so much time on the revision and proofreading and editing. Other times it'll be totally different. The other thing to be aware of is that the process is not linear. You know, we listed it in 6 steps, and those 6 steps seem to follow a chronological order for the process, but you can always go back. And in fact, most good writing is recursive, you know, so you're constantly coming back and generating more ideas and doing a little more planning, and you know, you're constantly revising along the way. But however your process starts to evolve, it's a good idea to remember those 6 steps and at least make sure that you have considered them. All right. But we're going to go back to the first step, which was that getting started phase. So slide 5 talks about the rhetorical situation, which we've already learned about now. This is part of that getting started step. So you want to consider that rhetorical situation. Make sure you have a focused topic, that your angle is solid, that you know what your purpose is, you know who your readers are, and you have considered the context of your writing. Okay, that sets a really good foundation for you to move forward. You'll see that the next few slides kind of, you know, take a pause, and they want, you know, to make sure that you are understanding the assignment. That is the first thing you want to make sure of before you start considering anything else. You know, if it's an open-ended assignment, then you have a lot more freedom. But if it has specific parameters, you want to make sure that you have understood the directions. So there's a couple slides there that list the different kinds of terms that might be used in an essay assignment or even a small written response assignment. You know, you want to make sure that you are familiar with these terms. You don't have to memorize them. They're there just for you to look over and kind of store in the back of your head. That way, when you have an assignment that tells you, you know, you need to compare and contrast these 2 things, that's what you're actually doing in your essay, that you haven't instead started to classify, or that you haven't taken it into a cause and effect route. You know, so familiarize yourself with those terms just to make sure that you are understanding every assignment that you receive, and that way you are executing it properly. Because nothing is worse than putting all of this time and effort into an essay that might be really fantastic, but if you didn't do what was actually asked of you, then you might fail the assignment, or at the very least, you're going to have to start over, and that's just a lot more work than was necessary. So after those slides, we get almost to the end of the PowerPoint, and we come back to, you know, developing a topic, right? So you've understood the assignment. You have started to think about that rhetorical situation, but the first element of the rhetorical situation is the topic. So how do you start coming up with a topic? You use your pre-writing techniques, right? You want to make sure that you're using those pre-writing techniques to come up with a limited subject. You know, most writing assignments that you'll get, they will have like a page limit or at least a recommendation. This essay should be 3 to 5 pages, right? So you want to make sure that you're choosing a topic that you can cover in that number of pages, and you want to make sure you can cover it thoroughly and properly. So those pre-writing techniques that are listed on the final slide, that is what you should try to use to get to that focused subject. A lot of people skip the pre-writing. They just go right into the drafting. But the pre-writing is so important, and it's just for you. There's 4 techniques that are listed on the slide, but honestly, it's whatever works for you. The first one that's listed is journal writing. You can see an example of that on page 35 of the textbook. And we do journaling in this course, but this kind of journaling that the PowerPoint is talking about is like if you keep a daily journal for yourself and you have all these ideas and thoughts that you're keeping recorded in this journal. If you don't do journaling on your own, or if it's not a daily assignment for a course, then this pre-writing technique might not fit as well for you. The next one is listing. So there's also an example of that on page 35 of the textbook. I'm a big fan of listing because I often just have to take whatever free time I have, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and I don't really have time to worry about putting thoughts into sentences or organizing them as I'm writing them down. So listing is very helpful to me personally. I just start jotting down all my thoughts. It doesn't matter how crazy they are, how off topic they are. I'll go back to it later and start sorting through it and kind of grouping ideas together, which is often what mapping or clustering is like. So there's an example of that on page 36 of the textbook, but that's the one where you have like the circle in the middle, right? And that's your topic. And then you have lines coming off that circle, and there are smaller circles at the end of those lines. Then you may even have more lines coming off of those smaller circles with even smaller circles at the end of those lines. And what that kind of represents, it's a visual representation of an outline in a way, because you've got your main point here, right? Like the main topic of your essay. And then those first sets of circles coming off of the big one are like your main points that you're going to discuss in the essay. And then those smaller circles coming off of those circles are like the supporting details that you're going to use in those main points. I often have problems when I'm trying to do clustering where I'll come up with a thought and I don't really know which circle to attach it to. And then I spend too much time trying to figure out where I should place it, and then I lose my train of thought. If that happens to you, just put it anywhere. You always can go back to it and figure out, you know what, that actually probably should have gone over here with this circle. And you can revise it and then have a better idea of how you want to group your thoughts together. Again, the pre-writing is for you. Nobody else is really going to see it. The fourth example that's listed on that slide is free writing. Now this is actually more like what we do in the daily journals for this class. You'll see when you start doing them, I've given you a prompt. You're not just sitting down and writing on your own on whatever you want to write about. So I've given you a topic and you will write for 10 to 15 minutes straight on it. So that's really more what free writing is. It is literally free writing. No rules, no nothing. You just sit and start writing and see what ends up on the paper. It can often lead to some really cool ideas. And I always tell students that, it's up to you which of the pre-writing techniques you use, and you might use a variety of them in different situations. You might use more than one. I'm one for using the listing or the free writing if I have time to sit down and do it for 10 to 15 minutes straight. And then I might take that information and put it in a visual form by clustering it or doing an outline of it. So don't be afraid to mix and match these. Don't be afraid to experiment with them and see which ones work best for you. You may come up with your own type of pre-writing technique. If you do, share it with me. That'd be kind of cool. But don't forget about this first step, because you really want to make sure that you are certain of your topic and that you are certain that you have a focus topic. I had a student one quarter who wanted to do his research paper on the conspiracy theories of September 11th. And his pre-writing was massive. He had this mapping, this clustering that had so much on it. And I'm like, you can't do this in a 3 to 5 page paper unless all you're going to do is just briefly explain each of these conspiracies. And then what's the point? You haven't actually, gotten into any of the new detail. I was like, so, you have the whole thing in your main point. Why don't you take one of these smaller issues and make that your main point? And it worked really well for him, actually. So the pre-writing can be very helpful to you. You want to make sure that you're using something to help you get your ideas down on paper and come up with a focused topic. As you're doing that, don't forget about that rhetorical situation, right? If you engage in this first step, I promise you that you are setting yourself up for success, and you are taking away a lot of extra work that you might end up having to do later on in the process, right? If you have any questions about this, especially the pre-writing techniques, feel free to get in touch with me. Otherwise, I hope you use them not only for the assignment that goes along with it for this week, but when we actually start doing our essays as well.